We just got the balance preview for Season 8 that includes a ton of changes, including buffs to characters like Doomfist, Ramattra, Winston, Tracer, and more. Combine that with nerfs to characters like Brigand Bap, and fundamental changes that could destroy the counter-swapping rock, paper, scissors meta. Press that like and subscribe for a free puppy for Christmas, and let's get into it. Now, first up, let's talk about swapping heroes. And they said this: we're making a general change to the amount of ultimate charge retained when swapping heroes, reducing it from 25 to 15. We do like this mechanic removes friction when swapping heroes and think that it should still stay at 15%. However, there's a perception that it's almost always an advantage to counter swap upon dying, and we're lowering this value to see if it has an effect on swap rates. Now, while I don't believe that just swapping to find the best thing to deal with your opponent is the best way to get better and climb in Overwatch, it was frustrating that there was almost no penalty to losing a fight and then swapping to the next best character that counters, especially in the tank matchup, because they just got to carry all their ultimate charge that they got in a lost fight straight into a more favorable matchup for them. And I think this kind of balances it out a little bit more. I think 0% is way too little because, like they said, it's a good idea to encourage people to try to swap and not make it as painful for people to swap, which is always a problem where people are like, oh, I got this ultimate charge. It's kind of like that sunk cost fallacy, right? You already put in all the work and effort to build up that ultimate charge and you're just gonna let it go. So it's kind of getting rid of a little bit of that, and at 0 it really makes it so people don't swap when they probably should way before. But having it at 25 was just creating some really unfair situations with swapping to counter. So I think this is a happy medium, but we're gonna have to see how this plays and how it affects that swap rates like they said. Now, Roadhog has been terrorizing ranked, and this is what they have to say about it. We released a reworked Roadhog late into Season 7. Roadhog quickly became one of our top performer tanks with a win rate somewhere around 54%. There's been a lot of feedback around this kit, and we're going to hold off on making any changes at the start of Season 8. Malka has a lot of answers to Roadhog, and we'd like to see where the meta settles a bit before aiming at the mid-season patch for any balance adjustments. Now, after Roadhog initially came out and his heal was a little bit underpowered, they buffed him right away within like 3 or 4 days, and I made a video talking about how I was afraid about making Roadhog this unkillable monstrosity. And in the comments, a lot of you disagree with me, especially Hog mains being really happy that he's finally going to get the play time that he so deserved because he was so bad for so long. But I definitely do think that they crossed the threshold, crossed the line with where Roadhog is at right now. And y'all get to feel that now in your games. It's happening in pretty much every rank where Roadhog is just this like unstoppable monster that just kind of walks around and doesn't really die, never. Like, it's very similar to the Orisa situation, where if you don't have, like, a really optimized comp for punishing the tank, you should just ignore the tank. Basically, ignoring the Roadhog, ignoring the Orisa. But it's kind of hard to kill everyone else besides the Roadhog when, like, randomly he could just kill somebody. So, Roadhog is definitely in an overtuned state, but with all the other changes, they're gonna wait probably till the mid-season patch before they decide what to do with Roadhog and how this should change up from here. I would imagine whether or not some more fundamental changes should be made, or perhaps just some cooldown tweaks here and there. Now, something that I'm super pumped about, Doomfist buffs, and they said this: there are times when Doomfist players use his ultimate purely as an escape. It's a little disappointing to activate Meteor Strike and intentionally land on a health pack rather than the enemy players. Starting in Season 8, Doomfist will now regenerate 75 health per second while in the air. We're slightly increasing the cost of the ultimate in order to compensate for the buff. Now, I don't know if I'm alone in this, maybe I'm just a washed up Doom player, but I've been struggling on tank as of the recent Doomfist nerfs. Like, he is not very consistent at solo killing anything anymore, and actually, new Roadhog, now that you can't cancel Breather and just shut down that cooldown, you are just so freaking screwed against that matchup. It's just terrible. But this buff is actually a really meaningful buff that I'm happy about. Yes, the ultimate costs more, and I don't really think that they needed to go that far, but the fact of the matter is you're not going to have to run away with this ultimate anymore, which was probably like half the ults, maybe like 40%, 35%, but still, this happened way too often, and you never felt comfortable ulting when you were low HP, and oftentimes, even if you thought maybe you could clutch a fight, you're like, oh, it's probably better to just reset, get a power punch, go in, then ult when my team is healthy. But now, because it heals you, you can make that call a lot easier. You're like, hey, I could get full health here, and maybe get a kill, and then use my empowered punch to kill someone else that's low, and then I could actually clutch up and turn this fight. It makes the ultimate way better from one of the worst ultimates in the game to an ultimate that I think is actually pretty decent. So yeah, I'm really excited about this, and Doom has definitely needed some freaking buffs, especially in this meta right now. He is struggling, or maybe I'm just struggling, but I don't care. Regardless, I need these buffs. I need it, okay? I need it, okay? I deserve it. Okay, I'm just joking. Anyways, we do gotta talk about Ramattra buffs, and they said this: tanks are supposed to take and create space, and when Ramattra is in his base form, he can be a little too easy to ignore. So they're shifting 100% of his health to armor, as well as slightly increasing the size and damage of his projectiles to see if that helps. Now, Ramattra is always a numbers game because, you know, he could always be meta if his numbers were strong enough, and the fact is this buffs both the brawl aspect of the character, going in and punching, and it also buffs the fact that he can poke for more damage. We don't know the numbers yet, but it does seem that this is going to just straight up help Ramattra in both of their weak points, and Ramattra has heavily fallen out of favor as of recent times, so I think this buff is justified. Now, next up, we do gotta talk about Winston buffs, and they said this: Winston isn't the best matchup for other tanks. This is part of his kit, but the disadvantage feels too extreme, and we'd like to alleviate it a bit. In Season 8, Winston's Tesla cannon will now ignore armor's damage reduction. Now, this is not only going to make Winston just better against other tanks, but it also makes him better against some notable characters like Brig and Torb that he absolutely struggles against in a dive, and that's a really big deal. Like, it's a really nice buff to dive, especially when we do talk about some of the BAP and Brig nerfs that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So yeah, it's a nice deal for Winston mains, and I think it's a plus for dive as a whole. Maybe we'll see dive a little bit back in the meta slightly, but we'll have to wait and see. Now, moving on to DPS, we have Sombra buffs, and they say that she's in a much better spot, but her win rate still hovers between 45 and 48% depending on rank. Her ultimate still isn't as satisfying as it could be, so they're going to raise the ability lockout time of her EMP by 1.5 to 3 seconds and reduce the amount of damage it does from 30% to 25% of maximum health. This brings her ultimate more in line with her hero fantasy and is much sharper in its effect. And this I actually think is a really good change, because when you ult and it doesn't really cancel their abilities for very long and they can use them pretty much right away, it doesn't really feel that impactful, and it feels like just the same as like normally hacking people, which I think normal hack is a good thing, but when it's on the ultimate, it should have a little bit more effect, right? It's still nowhere near as strong as previous EMP, but it feels much more like an ultimate now, as opposed to something that you just mainly use for tempo and just use to like cancel other people's ultimates and abilities. Next up, we do gotta talk about Soldier 76 nerfs, and they said this: Soldier 76 had enjoyed a lot of success in Season 8. He's a really well-rounded DPS, and the self-sustain from his heal can make him really difficult to deal with when it's in its radius. Rather than reducing the effectiveness of the heal, they're opening up larger windows of opportunity by increasing the cooldown from 15 to 18 seconds. Now, personally, I don't really think that's gonna change Soldier all that much. Most of the time, he's gonna have one engagement, and then he's gonna reposition, and by the time he repositions, he's really close to getting his heal station back anyways. But still, there are going to be some times when you're going to have to slow down your engagements, or you're going to have to decide to engage without it because your team's already fighting, or whatever the case may be. That might come up, so it is going to nerf him. But if you're a soldier man that's having success, don't feel like this is going to fundamentally change your character's placement or anything in a tier list. Now, next up, we gotta talk about Tracer frickin' buffs, and they said this: did anyone remember how much damage Tracer's pulse pistols do? I wouldn't blame you if you don't. We've changed them a lot. If you guessed 5.5 damage per shot, you'd be right, but not for long, because we're changing them again back to 6. The previous change to 5.5 was made to offset a bug with the fall off and spread. Now that those bugs are fixed, we're moving them back to their previous value. Now, from my understanding, this is still a buff because the bugs were fixed quite a bit ago. Like, they're not fixed right now, and Tracer has been in this state for a while, and people have been playing Tracer in this state for a while. And she's been fine, but there's a lot of characters that have kind of been shutting her down. Unfortunately, Tracer can be played kind of in any meta, but there are characters that really just kind of shut her down. Characters like Torb, characters like Brig, and in a poke meta, oftentimes Tracer is just kind of falling out the race side. So this buff is going to give her a lot more power. Like, it's actually going to feel a lot better. Tracer's going to feel more powerful, and I do think that this is going to be a really big deal to the character. So I'm really excited for these Tracer buffs, combined with the Sombra buffs, combined with the Winston buffs. I do think that all these combined kind of paint a dive picture. You know, I'm really a dive fanboy, but honestly, until we get like fundamental changes to characters like BAP and characters like Roadhog and Orisa, I don't really know if we're gonna go into a dive meta anytime soon. But I can definitely freaking hope. I can definitely ask Santa for it for Christmas. I want dive meta back, but we'll wait and see on that. The last up, we do gotta talk about Brig and Bap nerfs. They said, let's look at our support changes. Brig was the best performing support hero since the last patch, and we're seeing your feedback that she's becoming a must pick. They're gonna be changing the damage of Whip Shot to try to bring her back in line. And then they're also looking at the damage potential of Baptiste, lowering his primary fire ammo from 45 to 36. Now, little small changes like this might not seem like a lot, but if you change any support even a little bit, other powerful supports become appealing in their spot. There's a lot of really powerful cooldowns and abilities in that role, so it's really a competition between all of them. And while these characters are definitely going to be still staples of the meta, they might see like a couple percentage points less because of these changes. Anyways, let me know which of these changes you're most or least hyped about. Is there any big missed opportunities, or are there other characters that you think deserve buffs right away? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you, smash that like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.